So today we're joined by Scott Taylor, who is the CEO and co-founder of Perks Health, a digital health company. And Scott's here to tell us more about Perks Health. And then after that, we have the chance to pick his brains and hear more about his experiences for the next hour. So I have a few questions already lined up from the registration forms, but I encourage you to keep adding to these in the Q&A function down the bottom. And I'm going to hand over to Scott to take us through a bit about Perks Health. Thanks, Scott.
Awesome. Thanks, Danica. Hi, everyone. I'm Scott Taylor, CEO and co-founder of Perks Health. Perks Health is building the world's most engaging digital chronic care program for people who are managing chronic conditions daily. You may ask, what is a digital chronic care program? Digital chronic care programs are, not surprisingly, digital programs that help people managing chronic disease. So think things like diabetes or asthma, mental health conditions, or even rarer conditions like cystic fibrosis. Typically, they consist of a patient-facing app or portal, some form of remote monitoring. It might include a device, and then tries to link all that back to a care team to help that patient managing a chronic condition see better results. They're usually developed by clinicians or healthcare teams who then partner with healthcare providers, so that's organisations that deliver care, as well as health and life insurers to deliver them to patients at scale. The obvious incentive for those providers or insurers is to fund these solutions in the hope that they help patients achieve better outcomes at a lower cost by improving the patient management behaviours. So that might be taking medication properly, being more physically active, attending appointments, helping them stick to those treatment plans, and then, in doing so, avoid expensive, avoidable trips to the hospital. And to give a kind of sense of perspective, in some age groups and demographics, it's estimated over 30% of hospitalizations could have actually been avoided by better treatment management. So not surprisingly, health insurers, life insurers, and even healthcare providers like New South Wales Health, or in the US, there's more private providers, are investing a lot of money in digital chronic care solutions to try and help patients managing chronic conditions see better results and actually reduce their cost and the overall cost of healthcare. The problem is that most of these digital chronic care programs can't actually engage the patients they need to engage most, and that's the high-risk, complex patients who may be managing multiple chronic conditions, may have lower health literacy, lower socioeconomic status, or just worse outcomes. And often we see in some of the big chronic care programs that exist in both Australia and the US, enrolment rates can be as low as 5 to 10%. And so the willingness to invest heavily in these programs is somewhat lowered by the fact that they know that the most patients aren't actually enrolling and continuing to engage with the programs, and therefore unlikely to see better results. So Perks fundamentally exists to build the highest engagement digital chronic care program that all patients want to use and continue to use to see better health outcomes. Our solution consists of a patient app which drives unprecedented engagement for a digital health app. And patients actually use it more like a mobile game or a social media platform than your typical health solution. For example, the average health app is used once or twice per week. The average Perks patient uses our app 3 to 4 times per day, and our engagement rate is higher than Facebook and Twitter. We do this by using a range of motivational drivers, things like gamification, rewards, and community challenges, as opposed to traditional healthcare solutions or even traditional digital care programs, which use education and rely on that solely to engage people, which is arguably the least engaging way to motivate someone to engage and form a habit daily. We then use that engagement to drive patients to complete critical healthcare tasks like taking medication, completing physiotherapy, or even logging vital measurements like blood pressure and weight. And we've demonstrated an ability to help patients complete over 95% of their tasks, where a lot of clinical research demonstrates that 40 to 60% treatment plan adherence is normal. We can also enroll and engage the patients who need the most help. So our programs actually attract patients of all walks of life. And then our expertise is actually helping patients with multiple conditions, complex treatment plans who often don't enroll in other digital care programs. And that's a real point of difference in our solution and why we've been able to kind of really demonstrate outsized results with populations. And we've actually done quite a bit of work with the University of Technology Sydney, UTS, and the University of Sydney, where we have run multiple research trials to demonstrate our impact, not only on behaviour and helping patients take medication properly, complete physiotherapy, more correctly, but actually see better outcomes. So, in a randomized control trial we did with University of Sydney that completed earlier this year, we actually demonstrated not only are people more likely to stick to their treatment plan, but actually see better results. So diabetes patients reducing HbA1c, cardiovascular patients reducing cholesterol, effectively showing that if you give a patient perks to manage their condition, they'll see better results than standard care. Perhaps not surprisingly, this has attracted a lot of attention from payers and providers who are used to seeing these chronic care programs that really struggle to engage the patients they need them to. And we're now working with some of the leading insurers and providers in Australia, including New South Wales Health, HCF Insurance, QBE Insurance, TAL, and also several disease advocacy organisations like Cystic Fibrosis Australia and Diabetes New South Wales and ACT. And actually earlier this year, we launched with our first US customer, who's a large provider network to thousands and thousands of patients in Texas, Colorado, and Florida. The US is a big market opportunity, which is probably not a surprise to anyone. We're actually raising capital at the moment to support our growth as we expand the team and build our presence in the US. Ultimately, the future we want to see in healthcare is digital chronic care programs for all patients, not just those who are healthier, not just those who are more educated or health literate or only managing one condition. And we plan to bring the best practice engagement tactics to healthcare to do so. So we can ensure all patients stay engaged, motivated to improve their health habits and see better health outcomes as a result. In terms of why you should be interested in Perks or why you should be interested in what we're doing, the reality is 1 in 2 people globally are living with a chronic condition. So as is with probably everyone on this call, it's highly likely either yourself or someone quite close to you will be diagnosed with a chronic condition at some point in your lifetime. And the quality of life of that person or of someone living with a chronic condition is highly dependent on your ability to manage your condition, your treatment plan, and stick to the tasks that your doctor or your care team has prescribed to you continuously for the rest of your life. And so, I mean, that's ultimately what we're trying to do at Perks, is make sure that no one is left in the lurch after being diagnosed with a chronic condition, and that all patients can achieve the best quality of life possible living with a chronic condition. And with that, I'll pass back to Dhammika for questions.
Thanks, Scott. I mean, it's always really motivating and empowering to be doing something in healthcare, I think, and you can really see the benefits, and I really value what Perks is doing in that sense. And it's a fabulous story, and I'm really looking forward to unpacking it a bit and hearing about some of the goals you've kicked along the way, I suppose. We might start off with your personal background, right? So your journey, where did you actually start your career in? How did you end up where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually studied at the University of Sydney, did a degree in economics and finance, and actually specialised in behavioural economics, which is potentially why some of the kind of motivation and engagement strategies that we use are kind of ingrained in these behavioural economic or behavioural science principles. And from there, I went into finance, actually spent quite a bit of time in investment banking and then private equity investing, looking at consumer tech and retail companies. I partnered with my co-founder, Hugo, who was actually doing, working with very similar companies in the consumer, retail and gaming space around consumer promotions and engagement. And not surprisingly, we saw eye to eye on a lot of things around, how to best engage people, how to motivate them to do certain things, how to get them to form certain habits. And I think we both had a pretty strong interest in healthcare. We both have family members managing chronic conditions. And we'd kind of seen this weird anomaly in that, the strategies that we know from consumer, tech and retail industries that are so effective at getting people to complete certain tasks, form certain habits, really weren't being used in healthcare. And particularly looking at our own family members, saw that there was ways that we could be motivating people differently or engaging people differently, other than just providing them an educational pamphlet on their way out of the GP's office. And so that's where we really started out and started to kind of, play around with Perks. We actually, we had the idea and we were thinking about, do we leave our corporate jobs and go and start the company, or do we stay doing what we're doing? And But I think that the really motivating thing for us was just the realization that there was a lot more to this than just starting a startup or running our own company. It was that if this crazy idea that we had worked, and we didn't do it, there were literally millions of people that could be affected by the fact that traditional healthcare struggles to engage people with chronic conditions to do the things they need to do. And so that for us was the driving force behind resigning from our previous roles and starting the company. Was just the motivation to really go and make an impact in some way if we could.
Yeah, well, you beat me to the question of why healthcare. I think that really sums it up nicely. It's an important one, and I guess motivating people. Who doesn't want to be rewarded for doing things that you should be doing, but also it's a wonderful motivation and incentive for everybody in the entire process, I suppose. You guys started up in 2016, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. How has your team, since two founders, evolved since that time?
Yeah, I mean, Hugo and I often joke that we started a health tech business with neither of us having backgrounds in health or technology, which was probably quite ambitious back then. We were fortunate to have early on some really good technical advice, and actually the first several hires that we made were people who could really help us build the product. In saying that, I think that a lot of early stage founders would benefit from taking a pretty lean approach. So we built the first version of Perks for $5,000 and contract development, and we've completely rebuilt it since then. But I think it was really powerful to get a version of the product that we could look and feel, that we could share with potential customers, investors, and patients, most importantly, to get them to tell us what they like, what they don't like. So definitely, if anyone who's kind of looking at a quote for hundreds of thousands of dollars to build the first version of your prototype, please don't. You can definitely spend that money better, and probably by bringing the first technical hire on board to help build it themselves. And so I always encourage people to look at that. We're fortunate then to have surrounded ourselves with some really amazing engineers and product team. And that was kind of where the most of the early team hires were made. We then were also brought in a lot of good advisors on the healthcare side, because we were passionate about getting up the learning curve on healthcare. And then more recently, we've really started looking at kind of actually building out the business side, which Hugo and I, given our backgrounds in kind of more the business side of things, were running ourselves to an extent. But then we brought on a fantastic program manager who helps us deliver programs to our customers. We hired a fantastic data analytics and user engagement and user experience employee early in the piece as well. And actually, we very recently brought on our first, a year ago now, brought on our first business operations manager to really help us with some of the tasks that were taking up more and more of our time. And actually, looking ahead, we're going to be focused probably as much on that business side as we are on the engineering side, as we start to bring on our first sales and customer success and marketing hires as well. So really becoming a much more diverse team, but early on it was very, very engineering and product heavy.
And I guess you've got a variety of customers, and so you're going to need different skill sets from your team, I'm guessing. Do you want to talk to that a little bit? I understand diversity, but perhaps it's not what we all think in digital health, the typical, you've got your engineers, but what sort of other skills are you looking out for in the people that you're hiring?
Oh, absolutely. I think that the biggest one is people who are hungry and really interested in working in an early stage company. I mean, the reality is there's a lot of benefits to working in an early stage company. There's a lot of downsides as well. And I think it's people who understand what those downsides of, you will have a lot more responsibility and potentially more than you ever dreamed of and wished for. And some people love that. Some people, really don't. Others, you'll also have, there won't necessarily be as many established processes. I mean, the reality of doing something new means that often there isn't people who've done it before, and so you have to be willing to do a bit of a test and learn, and be quite self-motivated in terms of looking at okay, we're going to try this. If it doesn't work, that's okay. Like that's how that kind of how things work, and that's how innovation happens. Is not by people doing the same thing because that's always the way it's been done. It's by trying, testing and learning. And so I think you really want to have a good think about, does that excite you or does that scare you? And it's okay to be scared at sometimes, but it's worth going in eyes wide open to what working for a early stage company doing a really new innovative thing means. And so often, when we focus on some of our hires, it's really just making sure that they're the right personality fit to be working at a startup, because it can be really hard if people are expecting to come into a big corporate style environment where systems and processes just get done because it's always been that way, or there's an expectation that you don't have to take on too much responsibility. But at the same time, I think when we think about the people who we've hired, it's people who actually relish that. They love the kind of the pioneering aspect of what they do. They love being able to take on that responsibility and true ownership. And the great thing about early stage and startup companies is that you do really get that ownership from day one, which is a fantastic way to learn.
I agree. I think there's such an exponential learning curve, a really quick way to grow in terms of your position as well. And I think the third thing is it's always a little bit uncertain in startup land, and you have to kind of get comfortable with that. Even if you're not initially, it is a good practice. You never know what's around the corner, and you've got to be able to adjust and adapt accordingly. And I think we know that being a team player is super important in most roles around the world. Do you think it's also important that people can adapt and take on other roles within a startup when they're required? So rolling up your sleeves, is that a big part of the culture at Perks as well?
For sure. And I mean, Hugo and I used to laugh that we were founders/janitors in our previous office, because it was a couple of rooms above a bookshop, and there's no one coming in and taking out the garbage or anything like that. So in terms of, try to lead by example there was a lot of roles that we did. And if you kind of think about that particularly that early stage team, maybe the first 10 employees in any company, is that you kind of are, you're starting off with one or two founders who do everything, and over time, are handing over responsibilities. And, again, like a lot of those early stage employees are very similar in that they probably wear not just, multiple roles, but actually multiple whole functions of the organization as part of their job description. And again, that is a fantastic way to get a lot of exposure to all aspects of the business. And I can tell you from talking to our early employees, you'll quickly figure out what you like, but most importantly, what you don't like. And so when we talk to, we're going through a capital raise now, and obviously following that, we'll look to be hiring in a number of roles. And we're talking to our existing employees about what is it about your role that you love? What is it about your role that you don't like, that doesn't fit you and your kind of personality and what you want to do long term? Because we want to figure out where we have gaps in the organization that need to be filled. And that, for some people, that might be like, I love customer account management, but I don't really like doing kind of the marketing materials, or I don't like the marketing strategy. Or it might be that someone loves the strategy side of things but doesn't like selling. And so those may be combined roles early on when it's a few employees. But I think the benefit of working for an early stage company is you can quickly figure out what you like within that kind of amalgamated role, and then you can hire for the people who are absolutely passionate about the thing that the other person isn't. And we'll be hiring, we'll be making sales hires to help kind of support that growth. We'll also be hiring marketing roles and also customer success roles as we continue to expand and grow.
Yeah, amazing. That totally makes sense to me. And I think we do a lot of gap filling in startups initially, but then you have the space and the breathing space to grow out, which is great. And I guess in, many of these situations, it's a pretty long road, like you said. You've got to be a bit resilient and things go up and down. So how do you as a leader stay motivated yourself? And then how do you keep your team motivated on such a, uncertain journey?
Yeah, I think again, and kind of to your point right at the start of our conversation, is the benefit of working in healthcare is that even on the days where everything, or even on the weeks where everything has gone wrong, a pitch fell over that you really thought was going to be a massive opportunity. Potentially you've had issues with the tech that you've had to resolve, and our teams had to work really hard on. Is that you've got a constant flow of patient stories about how what you're building has had an impact on their lives, or from their carers or family. And I think that is something that is specific to digital health, or med tech and health tech. It's easy to stay motivated, or it's relatively easier to stay motivated when you've constantly seen the positive impacts that what you're building has on the world. And I think one of the things I reflected on early in our journey was that we were seeing these amazing stories, like reviews from people that were essays long about the impact Perks had. And myself and one of our employees were probably the two who were getting most exposed to that. And so one of the things that we did was actively put that in a Slack channel, but also even putting a screen up in our office that was kind of those stories coming through, because we acknowledged, and I was talking to my co-founder about it, and we realized, well, actually half the team isn't actually even seeing these. And we knew how motivating they were for us to keep pushing, even when, things weren't going the way we planned, or we're challenged with something or other. And so, really surfacing those stories to the team was really important, and I think has done wonders for how people feel about what they're building, but also, when things do go wrong, it's kind of a bit uplifting. You inevitably get the latest review or the latest message from a user that is, super inspiring and motivating.
100%. And I think that's just it. Like, sharing that as a team is wonderful, because whatever happens in startups, you've got to celebrate every win, no matter how small, right? I think that's part of the building up and motivating. I'm going to actually throw to some of the questions that have been asked in the chat as well.
For sure.
Some of them I've answered, but a very specific one is, what's the story behind the name Perks Health?
Yeah, no, it's a good one. It's a good one. We initially were called Lucky Health, which is a bit of a weird kind of story from our early formation, and we quickly realized that probably wasn't the name we wanted to keep permanently. We came up with Perks. It was a combination of two things. I mean, first, the very simple original solution of Perks was basically rewarding people for taking their medication properly. And so we like the concept of perk, as in something that you get as a kind of little positive reward for, or a positive reinforcement of doing something that, and then you get a perk as a result. And then actually RX is kind of the symbol for medication. And so the combination of those two is how we came up with Perks, and it stuck. And I think we really like it, and we've stuck with it ever since.
Yeah, I like it. Very clever, very punny. I would like to ask another question. So chronic conditions run a really broad spectrum. Are there any particular kinds of chronic conditions that you think your app is better suited to for managing? And I mean, you've probably gone through a few of them that you've selected, but you can talk about pipeline as well.
Yeah, I mean, it is a really broad spectrum. The other statistic is that 50% of people managing a chronic condition are actually managing two or more. So the comorbidity of different conditions with each other is an area that we really think needs to be tackled. And so we've deliberately built Perks to be adaptable across as many conditions as possible. And if you go into the app, you'll see there's probably almost 100 different conditions that we list. As a result, what we believe is that over time, we need more solutions catering to people who are managing multiple conditions. And the benefit we do have is because we're not reliant on education or coaching in a specific condition area as a means to motivate and engage people, we can do that quite easily. So we've now delivered programs in everything from diabetes and cardiovascular conditions to mental health or behavioral health, to musculoskeletal injury recovery with some of our workers' compensation insurers, as well as respiratory conditions like asthma, COPD, and then rarer conditions like cystic fibrosis. So we've really sought to prove out Perks across a broad spectrum. And we think that's really important because, a lot of people living with cystic fibrosis develop diabetes, and a lot of people with diabetes develop a mental health condition. And so we need Perks to be a solution that can support people across their whole treatment and treat them as a person and not as a disease, or not as a task. That, you know, where there's a lot of medication solutions out there. We don't want to be medication. We want to be everything that need to complete, from medication to physiotherapy to logging measurements to booking the next appointment with a specialist, because fundamentally that's what a person has to do, not a disease.
100%. I love that, because you're people focused, right? Even though you're solving problems for health, which is, we can easily get hung up on the actual condition or the problem that we're trying to solve, but really we're solving for somebody, and that comes down to people. Really fantastic.
Absolutely.
So I love that. Another question we've got here is, how did you find your early, I know we're switching a bit here, but back to sort of looking at your team, how did you find your early employees, and do you have any advice for people just getting started?
Yeah, absolutely. So early employees, the most effective channel we've found to date is AngelList. So we've tried a few different ways to kind of recruit, and AngelList seems to get pretty high quality. And I think, going back to kind of my response earlier, it's almost pre-selected for people who want to work with startups. So that's definitely where we found probably the best candidates. And I think out of our team of 8 that we've hired so far, probably quite a decent proportion have come off AngelList. The other thing that we've had some success is actually talking to our existing team about whether they know anyone who has a certain skill set or is interested. I think that's been pretty powerful in terms of kind of bringing in people who kind of know the culture, know what the problem and what they're solving, but also finding really good quality candidates through our existing team members. I'd say that's and as a result, we always make a point of sharing with both our professional networks, but also our personal networks when we have a role available.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that's totally fair. And on the flip side, or maybe similar but different, partners, right? So what do partners mean to you and your company, and how do you identify the right ones and engage with them to ensure that you're aligned? You said you've got Sydney Local Health District, or New South Wales Health, was it? That's a huge one. I mean, that's a massive one to bring on board. You've got collaboration with universities. These are really important decisions. So how do you go about that?
Yeah, I mean, so we generally work with people who have identified that, for whatever reason, their chronic, the activities they're doing in chronic care are struggling to engage. And I think that is really important. We often will talk to people about the problem of poor engagement with existing chronic care activities. And not surprisingly, a lot of these big organizations have identified it, because they've either tried to run chronic care programs themselves, or they've engaged other chronic care programs to be delivered, and they've realized that they haven't had that delivered on the impact that they potentially could, but ultimately failed due to lack of engagement. And so that's I think a big one, is really finding the people who really understand the problem and probably look see the world in similar ways to what we do. And I think that is important. There's often times where we've spoken to people and they've kind of just come at it from a very hyper rational view of, why don't these people just do what they should be, what they're told. And when you kind of encounter a personality like that, I mean, it's fundamentally lacking in somewhat patient empathy, and empathy of someone managing chronic conditions. So you get occasionally these really weird discussions where you're like, you're clearly just not coming at this in the same way I am. And so I think that is really important. We've been really fortunate to have some fantastic partners that we've partnered with from very early on. HCF, one of our customers, we've literally met in probably the first 3 months of Perks after going through their Catalyst program. New South Wales Health, we met even earlier, and Sydney Local Health District, we met even earlier, and they've supported us through running a randomized controlled trial, and they're really forward thinking about how they're going to deliver care, looking forward into the future. And Sydney Local Health District in particular has set up RPA virtual during kind of basically just before COVID hit, which is an amazing feat in terms of a virtual hospital with programs across the district, and leading kind of the way in terms of how healthcare will look in 5 to 10 years time in Australia. And so, yeah, we would generally kind of find people who understand the problem that we're solving and unfortunately probably experience the pain of the problem we're solving, but also kind of see the future in the same way we do is probably the biggest thing I'd say.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It makes a lot of sense. And I guess we've got a question here from Nicole. Have privacy laws been a challenge for you to negotiate while we're on the topic of, healthcare and health system?
Yeah, I mean, they haven't been a challenge for us to negotiate because we have a pretty firm stance of privacy that we don't share or sell data to anyone who, outside of the patient. So while we're working with insurers, unless that patient is given consent to share information with someone like a claims manager or a care team, none of that individualized, personal information goes back to the insurer. We'll report to the insurer on the overall success of the program, the average adherence rate or the average engagement rate or the average outcome. But we won't be, we're not sharing individual member data back to those insurers. And similarly, there's no, we're not sharing any data back to any third party that isn't our customer or the end user. And so I think that is really important at this stage. And we actually, we have a big thing on our website about, this is our approach to privacy. And we want to be seen as kind of leading the way in that really patient-centric or user-centric approach to how we handle health data. We're also now live in the US, as I mentioned. And so they have a whole other realm of kind of privacy and security handling requirements in HIPAA regulations, which anyone in a healthcare business who's got ambitions of going to the US should really become familiar with. And so, hasn't been a challenge for us to negotiate, mainly because we take a pretty strict stance on what we do with our patient data, which is not much other than play it back to the patients.
Yeah, fair. And I think people out there who are delving into this space, because as we know, software as a medical device is becoming, more and more a part of every other type of device and thing that is happening out there in healthcare. Important to think about these things early on while you're building, right? You do not want to get led, further down the track and then it becomes a roadblock for integration and a whole bunch of other things. So I think you guys have done an amazing job and thought about it really clearly about what you want to be and who you want to be for the customer. Grant funding is another one, right? So you guys, you've had some grant funding along the way. How has that been for you? How did you know when it was the right time to go for these grants? And really importantly, your personal skill set. Did you have grant writing experience?
No, I definitely didn't. And grant funding has been really, critical to our journey from as early as, I think, we got the MVP grant early on, which helped us bring on our first software developer to help kind of execute on the vision. We've since received the Medical Devices Fund grant and the Accelerated Commercialization grant, which are two fantastic grant programs. In terms of securing those grants, knowing when you're going to apply, when the right time is to apply for them. I think there's some fantastic advisors out there, and we've used several advisors, which I'm happy to share. Our go-to grant advisor is a firm called Hunter Breals, and we can share those notes as well, and we can share their contact details as well. And they've helped us secure a number of those. In terms of when is the right time, I'd say when the project that you're going to be writing for that grant is aligned with what you're going to be executing in the business for the next 6 to 12 months. So you shouldn't be deviating your strategy or your business plan or what you're going to do just for the sake of trying to secure a grant. Sure, there may be some reporting requirements or there may be some additional things you do on top of your existing strategy, but I would recommend against people kind of shifting their business to try and secure grant funding because it'll be somewhat self-defeating. And the other thing I'd say is that it's worth getting as much kind of external input and advice as you apply for a big grant, because you'll find out certain nuances of how to position the company or how to position the project that may not have been as obvious, as someone who has applied before or who knows kind of the ins and outs of the grant process.
Gotcha. All important, really important things to think about, because money for the sake of money, deviating away from the business model, that's, something that can easily be done when you're in a startup in the early stages. So I think that's really wise. I'm going to answer some of these questions here with you. How do you, well, we might go, I know you've covered a bit of it, but what made you want to put together that specific program for chronic health? You know, is it a personal story, or is it just the gap that you saw that you said earlier? Was there anything, you know, I know you have family members that have chronic diseases, but was there a aha moment or a really pivotal trigger for that?
Yeah, so I think when we're kind of looking at bringing the strategies we've seen work so well in other industries to healthcare, the area where we could clearly have the biggest impact was people managing chronic conditions. Because if you think about those kind of engagement, motivation, habit formation strategies, I mean, ultimately where they can have the biggest impact is helping people living with chronic conditions, you know, stick to their treatment plan. And I think, yeah, I mean, I could say, oh yes, I have a family member with a chronic condition, but ultimately everyone does, right? It's not particularly a unique private, you know, personal story. I think we had the insight that we saw those family members who had really simple treatment plans struggle to stick to them. And I think, yeah, we realized it was a problem. But I think the other aha moment for us was we had this idea around, okay, we want to do something around using these strategies to motivate people to form health habits. And we thought chronic conditions was interesting. And then basically Hugo and I spent, yeah, probably the first 3 months of Perks driving around speaking to anyone who'd listened to us. So yeah, we went into pharmacies and just started chatting to pharmacists about medication adherence. We went to, we went and sat in the St. Vincent's cardiac rehab ward and spoke to doctors and nurses there about, you know, potentially, why do patients struggle to stick to, cardiac rehab and the activities involved in recovering from a major cardiac event. And I think one of the insights that kind of hit us over the head time and time again was just this asymmetry in information and asymmetry and a misunderstanding of how to best motivate people to do habitual tasks, which was this over-reliance on education and this misunderstanding as to why patients struggled to stick to habits. I think that there is a bit of an assumption, and it's probably not surprising when we talk to clinicians. They're the highest health literate people in the world by almost definition. And when we see the challenges of adherence, the one thing that adherence correlates with most is low health literacy. And so there was a bit of a kind of gap between, using education might make sense to someone who is highly health literate, because the definition of health literacy is the ability to use education and information to make the right daily health choices. But using education may make sense to someone who's highly health literate. But when 60% of Australians have poor health literacy, we're effectively using the tool that's least effective for them, even if it might make the most sense for the clinician. And so that, I think, insight of having discussions with a number of clinicians and people in healthcare, and then actually, our reflections on what does the average patient look like, was that kind of disconnect that we thought we could really, really help bridge that divide.
Gotcha. And how do you pick the rewards? How do you want to be rewarded with?
Well, the answer now is that our patients, and our users pick them for us. So we have, hundreds of rewards available within Perks, and over time, effectively, users can unlock and lock the rewards that they find most engaging. I mean, the really interesting thing for us that we've seen over time is that 15% of long-term Perks users have won rewards but never claimed them and are clearly motivated in different ways. And so I think that is really compelling, is that the gamification, the challenges, the community are actually in some ways as powerful motivators for some individuals as a financial gift card. And so we have people who will get locked out of the Perks app, and their first message to our support will be, I'm on a 180-day streak and I don't want to go back to zero, so I need to get back in, despite the fact they may have $10, $20 of rewards in there waiting for them. That's not the thing that kind of jumps to mind. And I think it is amazing to see how some of that kind of behavioral dynamics in gamification, challenges, and community can be just as powerful as incentives, or as what we think of as kind of financial incentives.
100%. So I might run back towards the team section again. And how do you see your team at Perks Health expanding over the next 12 months?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. Very timely. It's something that we're thinking about a lot at the moment. I think there's a number of roles that we're going to be looking to bring on. First and foremost, we've already got actually two job descriptions out there at the moment in the sales side of things. So you're looking for sales executives in both Australia and the US. For us, we've got some really compelling. We've seen the product, absolutely outperform our expectations. And if you told me it would be where it is now, 4 years ago when we started the company, I think I probably wouldn't believe you, because we've seen some fantastic outcomes. We've really been able to validate it across a number of disease areas and to quite a rigorous, robust level with randomized control trials and publications in major journals. And then, in terms of the customer side, we've secured some fantastic customers in Australia and now actually our first in the US. And so really proving out the willingness to pay, and several of those contracts are now escalating from initial paid pilots or initial contracts to multi-year scale-up agreements, which we want to support. And so I think where we're at is we've got a fantastic product and a fantastic value proposition to those customers. We just need to go out and start bringing on more customers and making them aware of Perks, which obviously is very sales focused. We've also got we need a customer success team to support that, particularly as some of our existing customers who may have been running small scale programs with a couple of people involved rapidly go to thousands of people that we're supporting every day in those programs. And so we need to build out that customer success function to make sure we're delivering the best possible experience to every single Perks participant, but also the stakeholders within our customers as well. And then the final area that we are quite focused on is enrollment marketing and making sure that we're kind of building a real expertise in that sense of things. So working with our customers to promote the programs throughout their organizations and throughout their customers and patients. We'll probably also continue to make a few hires in the software development side and the engineering side, particularly as we go into new geographies and that has new requirements. And we're also investing a lot of time in building out our clinical tools. So not only is there the Perks patient app, but there's also a clinical portal for care teams and clinicians to log into and see how patients are tracking, with all the appropriate consents in place between those patients and those clinicians, as well as enterprise tools that enables big organizations like QBE and New South Wales Health to bring the right patients into those programs and actually track the success of those programs over time. And so that will require us to expand our engineering team. And so I think maybe that's kind of is a very broad answer, but I mean I think that the answer is that we'll be hiring across a number of different roles across a number of different functions. So keep an eye out for those posts as they come through.
And can I just clarify so that people listening out there can get a gauge? Are you talking about people that are at senior level right down to entry level roles?
Absolutely. And I think ultimately experience for us, it's relevant in some roles, but actually in many roles we've kind of learned that actually hiring for someone who is a self-starter, who wants to work in a startup and has an active interest in the problem we're solving and the aspect of the problem that their role will be solving within the company is far more powerful than necessarily someone who has years and years of experience, but not particularly in the area that we're solving, may not be familiar with the problem, may just not be passionate about the problem we're working in a startup. And so very much it'll be all levels, and we're really looking for someone who's passionate about working with the team to solve the problem and also the kind of specific vertical that they'll be working in than necessarily someone with just a wealth of expertise who may not be.
Cultural fit, right? It's a big one. I'm going to I think we might wrap up soon, but a final question for you maybe is, what advice do you have for someone applying to be a part of your team? And maybe a second part of that question might be for those embarking on a career in digital health as well. So the first part is about Perks, and the second part, generally.
Yeah, the first I'd say is I think go through the established channels. the one thing that, I don't do very often is check LinkedIn messages or Facebook messages or anything like that. And we do occasionally have people who will just kind of send us a message on LinkedIn, despite the fact, it's very clear in the job description that this is the process. And I mean, the reality is that depending on the role, it may not even be me or my co-founder who is hiring, because if we want the best software engineer, we're much more likely to get our head of engineering to run that process than necessarily ourselves. And so I'd go through the established processes. The other one that I'd say is super important and seems somewhat obvious, but it's amazing how many people don't do it, is download Perks and have a play around, and really look to understand the value proposition, the patient product, and the problem that we're solving. And I think both of those pieces of advice are probably as relevant for applying for Perks as any other company or any other startup. Is really get yourself familiar with the product and the problem. And yeah, I think other than that, the other big one just for startups generally, and I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, is really think about whether you want to work at a startup. And maybe that also seems really obvious, but I think it is important to kind of go in eyes wide open with the big positives that come from starting a startup, but also that it will be different to working in a big corporate organization around levels of responsibility, levels of ownership, and the processes that exist. But for some people that's really exciting. For other people that just might not be your cup of tea, and that's nothing. There's no personal judgment in there at all. It's just that I think that is really important. People are aware of that before coming in.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Scott, for that chat. It was fantastic. I'm sure a lot of people learned a lot about you guys just in talking about that, and what sort of things you're looking for in people, which is really important when we're talking about careers and especially in STEM. So I want to thank you for that, and thank everyone who joined us today. Your time is very precious, so we appreciate you spending that time with us. I'd also like to say a big thank you and shout out to our event sponsor, the City of Sydney, and our event partner, South Everleigh. For those of you that did tune in, we'll be hosting these sessions, Ask Me Anything sessions, with a range of deep tech companies, that wasn't supposed to be that hard, who are all looking for talent to hire, and we're doing this over 3 weeks. So keep sign up to our newsletter, register where you've seen the links. Importantly, we've posted some of these links in the chat, so you can also connect with Scott if you have some questions for him, or you want to hear more about Perks Health and what they're doing. We've also put some links into the other AMA chats, and also there's a fantastic job board there, so it's a really great tool for you to be able to see what everybody's looking for, what sort of roles are available, and all that jazz. So tomorrow, I think we've got a VR company, Neuromersive, and we've also got the big showcase on December 7th. So register, join us. These sorts of valuable chats are really hard to have. As Scott said, he's not going to chat to you on LinkedIn, but he's here to be listened to and asked. So tap into this, tap into the resources. Thank you all, and thank you, Scott, for your time today.